Today I want to talk about 7 signs that you are way ahead of the average person financially. It's not so much that you should be playing the comparison game and constantly, wondering how well you are doing stacking up to everybody else, because that thought process can be toxic. But the reason I think it's important to make this video is because the average person isn't doing so good. So it actually will make a lot of people feel better once you realize just how bad the average stats are for a lot of people. Because really the idea here is to encourage a lot of people who are already doing above average and try to light a fire under the ones who are below average. The sad reality is the average stats in America today are not good, and they don't give people a lot of hope for a stable future or a possibility of retirement or anything like that. But I get it, especially when you look around, you see people driving Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and that seems to be like the new normal now. A lot of people try to aspire to have that kind of stuff in life, but it's just not realistic for most people. And likely because of social media, somewhere along the way, people's standards of what's normal or attainable have gotten completely out of whack, okay? But this video is going to correct that for you, because contrary to popular belief, not everybody's out there living the lifestyle of the rich and famous. In fact, most people aren't, and the ones who you see who look like they are probably broke and drowning in debt. And something that's always been a big part of the problem is financial education, guys. In fact, only about 37% of Americans have a basic understanding of financial concepts. So improving your financial literacy can lead to a lot better investment decisions and saving decisions, and just enlighten you on what you should be doing in order to have a more stable and fun future. It's just not fun scrounging for pennies and trying to get by. So the first sign that you're ahead of the average person is, do you have an emergency fund? Meaning, do you have enough money for at least 3 to 6 months of expenses completely saved up? It also means you will not have to go into credit card debt or any other type of debt to pay for an unexpected life event. That's what an emergency fund is, okay? But a lot of people actually don't have this. About 2/3 of Americans don't have an emergency fund, guys. So if something happens to about 65% of the people out there, they're gonna have to draw on debt in some form or another in order to pay for that emergency. Or worse yet, if they lose their job, which can be devastating for a lot of people, now they could end up in an even worse situation, being evicted from their apartment or losing their home in foreclosure. Things like that happen to people that don't have an emergency fund. And this is why you hear so many people are living paycheck to paycheck today, because they don't have that emergency savings saved up. So if you have any sort of emergency fund at all, even if it's just 1 month or 2 months, you should be proud of yourself, because it means you're doing better than about 65% of Americans right now. And the number of people who are living paycheck to paycheck just continues to grow over the years. In fact, about 78% of US workers now report living paycheck to paycheck. So you can kind of lump this in there with this first category, that if you are not living paycheck to paycheck and you have somewhat of an emergency fund saved up, you're doing pretty good right now. The second thing is you have a savings account. 1/3 of Americans today have no savings at all, and 50% say they have less than $1,000 saved up, $1,000. 50% of people don't have $1,000. I remember I actually made a video about this over the summer when I was in California, and a lot of people were like, oh, that can't be right, Michael. Well, it is. I know it's shocking. I know it's kind of hard to believe. Like, how can you not have at least $1,000 saved up? 50% of people don't, guys. And we're not talking about people in third world countries. We're talking about fellow Americans here. And you got to be honest with yourself. If this is you, this is where you really need to start with your finances, okay? It's imperative that you break away from this sort of cycle in life, because if you don't have money for an emergency, or you don't have even $1,000 saved up, or really nothing at all, you're just going to be accumulating problems and debt that eventually are going to leave you bankrupt and put you on a path where you may never have any sort of financial freedom ever. If this is resonating with you, you realize that you might be in this category, this is also your sign to start turning things around, because this is not the path you want to be on if you want to have a prosperous life in the future. And unfortunately, this is becoming too much of a trend in the country. I mean, if you look at the personal savings rate from the Federal Reserve, going all the way back to the 1960s, guys, people were saving about roughly 10% of their household income. Fast forward to today, it is close to near all-time lows at about 4.4% as of the November 2024 reading. So it is not looking good. And I know not all of that is due to the fact that, you know, people don't want to save money or they're buying too many things. A lot of it is due to inflation and the loss of our purchasing power, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. The third stat that puts you ahead of the average Joe is, do you have any money saved for retirement? Anything at all. If you have something, you're already ahead of a lot of people. About 25% of Americans have no retirement savings at all. So if you have some, you're already in the 75% of people who have something. Now, the average of what Americans have saved for retirement is about $88,000 as of 2024. So if you have more money than that saved for retirement, you're doing very well right now. Now, that's just the average across all different age groups, okay? So don't feel too bad also if you fall below that number, because a lot of people will, especially if you're on the younger side. But if you're somebody who's trying to better your financial future, you should be striving to at least save about 15% of your salary and put that towards your retirement in order to put you on track, guys. And honestly, if you can afford to save more, then go for it. Because also, the more you save, the quicker you can get to retirement, you know? Everybody has to determine that fine balance for themselves of when does it make sense to save more and when does it make sense to spend more in life, you know, because you have to live while you're alive. You don't want to save everything towards the end. But if you're comfortably saving 15% and you know you could at least save 20 and still have fun, by all means, do it. Now, the fourth financial stat that can put you ahead of the average Joe is how much money you actually earn, okay? As of 2023, the median household income was at $80,610, which was a 4% increase from 2022, which they make it sound like, oh, people are getting rich over this, which they're not. That was just necessary wage increases that people needed just to keep up with the tremendous inflation we saw during that same time frame, which was well over 9% with the official numbers. And to make things even worse, that's the first real wage increase we saw since 2019. So that's not really a good thing. They make it look like it's a good thing that people are making more money, but really that was just a necessary cost of living increase that still wasn't enough to keep up with the life that we have to live now. But I want you to take a look at this Fred chart here that goes all the way back to the 1980s, okay? And in 2019, people were already earning about $81,000 a year. Then it actually went down. And then it crept back up as of the 2023 reading to the 80,000 that we just talked about. So essentially, over the past 5 years or so, household incomes haven't gone up at all. And when you adjust for inflation, they've actually gone down significantly. This next thing I'm going to show you proves that. So when you go back to 1989, for example, on this Fred chart, people were earning $64,000 a year, median household income back then, okay? And this just goes to show you how poor everyone is today, relatively speaking. Because when you adjust that $64,610 people were making in 1989 and bring that into 2025 numbers, that would be equivalent to making about $164,000 a year now, which is double what the actual median household income is. Okay, so somebody who was earning $64K a year in 1989 was equivalent to earning $164,000 a year in today's standards. Now, even by today's standards, even with how much we've seen inflation go up, even with how much the cost of living has risen, if you're earning $164,000 a year, you're probably doing okay right now. Unless you are horrible with your finances and you are living paycheck to paycheck because you have no control over your spending, you're probably doing pretty good. A lot better than the average person. But this chart is the perfect example that shows you that real wages really haven't kept up with the true cost of living at all. And so if you're somebody who's making higher than the $80,000 a year median annual income, consider yourself one of the lucky ones, guys. You are doing better than half of the people in this country right now. And one thing that can also help you with this, just a little side tip, is to have multiple streams of income. You know, a lot of people just have their job and rely on that. But the reality is, if you can have some other form of income coming in, that will be helpful. You know, even if it's just in the form of interest income, you have a high yield savings account that's paying you a couple $100s a month in interest. That's a secondary form of income. Maybe you have a side hustle going on or a side business on top of your job where you can bring in an extra $1,000 a month or so. That's a secondary source of income. That will help you achieve these financial goals way faster and easier than someone who's just doing the bare minimum. The fifth thing that puts you ahead of the average person is also your monthly expenses. Now, let's use a different figure. Let's use average household income, not median. When you go by the average, it's $94,000 a year, according to the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But we know that these averages are skewed quite a bit higher due to the people who actually earn a lot of money. So this is not reflective of what the average person actually does earn. Well, let's just roll with these numbers for a second, okay? Average households earning $94,000 a year, but the average American expenses are about $6,080 a month, which is about 77% of the average monthly income. And this is probably more in line with reality, actually, of what most people's monthly budget is, but a lot of people don't actually have the income to support it. And you also have to remember that average of $94,000 a year, yeah, well, that is before taxes. That's gross incomes. That's not your take-home pay. So let's take a look at the average US household's budget right now. And when you see these numbers, you can see this is probably pretty close to what a lot of people are facing. Housing, $2,024 a month. Transportation, a little over $1,000 a month. Personal insurance and pensions, $728 a month. Healthcare, $487 a month. Food at home, $475 a month. Food away from home, $303 a month. Entertainment, $288 a month. Cash contributions, $229 a month. Apparel and services, $162 a month. Education, $111. And miscellaneous, $84. That adds up to a little over $6,000 a month for the average household. So if you spend less than this on any of this stuff, then you are ahead of the average person. However, I wouldn't be focusing on if you spend less. I would be focusing more on the income side of things. Keeping your expenses in line with the average that we see here, but also keeping your income much higher than the average is the real secret to getting ahead and generating wealth, guys. It's keeping your expenses at bay while continually increasing your income and not giving into lifestyle inflation. This is what ends up happening to most people. Everybody's guilty of it, even myself, right? Like now I can take an annual trip to California in the summertime because I don't have any kids and I don't have any debt, so I can spend a little extra money than I used to, right? That's lifestyle inflation. I couldn't do that, 7 years ago. But at least I try to keep the rest of my lifestyle in check, so it's not like I'm spending exponentially higher amount on my mortgage or my rent or anything like that, trying to keep those expenses stable, so it does leave you a little extra spending cash for fun. And only about 41% of Americans maintain a monthly budget of their finances. So if you're somebody that can do this, then you will be ahead of the game as well. Now this number 6 stat is a trick, and it comes with a caveat. But it is if you own a home, okay? Now this is a trick because even if you own a home, it doesn't necessarily put you ahead of a lot of people, because the caveat is you need to have a significant amount of equity in your home to really be ahead of the average person. Because as of the 2024 stats, about 65.5% of Americans are homeowners, which is a surprisingly high amount. But once you take into consideration the age of our population, it's actually not as surprising as the numbers look, because most people who own a home are on the older side. Because when we look at home ownership rates of young adults, those who are under 35 has declined from 46% in 1990 to 39% in 2022. So it's not looking good for the average young person right now. So if you are a young person that owns a home, well, congratulations, that puts you ahead of a lot of other young people. But it's not just about owning a home. As I mentioned in my most recent video about how much it actually costs to be a homeowner, the expenses are well over $3,000 a month on average, okay? And that's just the average. So unless you can cover those expenses with ease, then you're not really as ahead of the game as you think you are, even if you have a decent amount of equity, and I'll explain why. First of all, you don't have access to that equity, guys. Unless you borrow against it with today's high interest rates, which would be very foolish to do unless you need it for an emergency, you don't have that equity. The only other way to access it besides borrow it is to sell your house. And then when you do sell, you still need to pay capital gains taxes, whether it's long-term or short-term, and you have to pay off your mortgage, and you have to subtract any of the money that you actually put into the house over the years that you owned it. Whether it's the property taxes you paid, whether it's the insurance that you paid, whether it's repairs, remodeling expenses, anything at all that you had to pay for on that home in addition to your mortgage was an expense, okay? That's also an expense that you wouldn't have as a renter. And you need to use that to really determine how much you actually walked away with in the end. And here's an example of what I mean. People say that renting is a waste of money, right? You get to the end of your lease, or maybe you've been renting for a few decades, and then you make your last rent payment, and what do you have to show for yourself? Nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. You own nothing in the end when you're a renter. But homeownership can actually work out to the same math pretty easily, guys. Let's say you sell a house, and to keep the numbers simple, you come out with $100,000 in profit. After your mortgage is paid, after everything, all the closing costs, you walk away with $100,000 in your bank account. Say you own that house for 10 years and you paid $5,000 a year in property taxes. That's 50 grand right there. Say you had to put a new roof on the house at some point, that cost you $20,000 right there. That's already 70 grand. And think about all the insurance premiums you paid over the years. Anything else you had to fix or repair in the house along the way during those 10 years of ownership? Probably. So you could have owned this property for 10 years, and even though it looks like you made $100,000 in profit, you actually made nothing because of all the expenses you had to pour into that property over the years. So I ask you, what is the difference between paying for all those expenses and then essentially coming out breaking even after a 10-year period, and renting and not having any of those expenses and probably paying less in rent, and then also coming out with nothing in the end? What is the difference? In my opinion, absolutely nothing. It's the same thing. And a lot of people, when they hear me say stuff like this, they think I'm against buying a house and I don't want people to buy a house. That's not true at all, guys. In fact, I help a lot of people who watch this channel buy and sell real estate all the time. I have a link in the description of every single one of my videos that you can use to find a real estate agent anywhere near you, and it's 100% free. A lot of you have been taking advantage of this lately and have been having amazing results. I see closings coming in all the time, and it makes me happy to know that this service is actually helping a lot of you out there. But it's not that I don't want people to become homeowners and I don't want anyone to buy. It's just that I want people to understand what they're getting themselves into and not believe all the lies and the myths surrounding homeownership about it, how it's really so much better than being a renter, which might have been true 30 years ago, but really isn't today. And the worst part is you can't even listen to your parents or your grandparents or anybody who tells you that owning a home was better for them over the 30 years because of X, Y, and Z, because their circumstances are completely different than a young person looking to become a homeowner today. Wow, talk about an egregious flip. Check this one out. This is a funny one right here. This house was actually originally listed for sale back in April of 2024 for $2.4 million. Had to cut the price all the way down to $2 million to get it sold, okay? And then the person who bought it back in November of 2024 turned around and listed it for sale right away for $2.25 million, thinking that they're gonna be able to make a quick $200,000. Well, no one would buy it even before that for the $2 million except for them, and now somehow they think they're going to turn around and sell this. The delusion of reality these days is just mind-boggling, funny, and astonishing all at the same time. Number 7, and the very last stat that puts you ahead of the average Joe right now, is you are living a debt-free life. I know that sounds crazy, but that actually puts you ahead of a lot of people. In fact, almost everyone, because only 8% of Americans today are completely debt-free. So being debt-free is a significant advantage over what most people are experiencing, guys. And that includes no mortgage, okay? Being debt-free means you owe nobody nothing. Now, I will say that if you do have mortgage debt and no other type of debt, and your bills are paid easily and on time each month, then that's not really a problem, you know, because most people cannot afford to buy a house with cash. So there's no shame in having mortgage debt as long as it's a payment that you can afford with ease. But this is how chained to the system everybody is right now, where only 8% of Americans have zero debt, guys. So that's really the category you want to strive for. And when you hear people say that they're debt-free, they're actually a very rare breed in this country, and that is worth a tremendous amount of respect. Not only because it's, you know, an amazing achievement compared to what everybody else has been able to do, but also it puts them in the position where they have so much more financial freedom in their life than the average person. And like I said earlier, a lot of these stats really aren't that hard to beat. So you should use this as an encouraging jumping off point for yourself, especially if you're a younger person that's trying to work your way up in the world. This is the best position to be in right now, because you can look at these stats and say, I can do better than that, and make it happen. And for people who aren't doing better than that, you can use this as fuel and motivation to do a little bit better in order to have a more stable financial future. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.